Toxic people don't choose their victims randomly. In the first few seconds, they observe, test, and decide. Why do they always end up targeting you? Why do they seem to appear right when you're most polite, most understanding, most patient? There's something even more unsettling. It only takes a single behavior for them to mark you as a target. Stick around, because understanding this invisible pattern is the first step to stop attracting those who thrive on wearing others down. Toxic people don't need time to evaluate you. In the first few seconds, they're already observing how you react, what you allow, and where your limits are. They don't look for deep conversations or logical reasons. They look for signals, micro-responses that tell them if they can push a bit further with you. This test isn't conscious in most cases. It's a learned pattern. They observe if you smile when you're uncomfortable, if you justify yourself when you don't need to, if you try to maintain harmony at all costs. Each of these responses communicates something very specific. Access. Not access to your time, but to your emotional energy. Polite, empathetic, and patient people often fail this test without realizing it. Not because they're weak, but because they confuse kindness with unlimited availability. When someone makes an uncomfortable comment and you react by explaining yourself, nervously laughing, or minimizing what you feel, the message is clear. There will be no immediate consequences here. For a toxic person, that's an invitation, not to an open conflict, but to an unbalanced relationship. They know they can push a little more. And if there's no friction, they'll push again. Not out of conscious malice, but because that behavior has worked for them before. Those who are rarely chosen as targets aren't colder or more aggressive. They simply convey something different from the start. Firm neutrality. They don't react immediately. They don't explain themselves. They don't try to be liked at all costs. This absence of clear signals throws the other person off. The invisible test is based on a silent question. How far can I go with you? The answer isn't in what you say, but in how you react. And that initial reaction often defines the rest of the dynamic. Understanding this first filter is crucial, because everything that comes after depends on it. If you fail here, the pattern repeats. If you recognize it, you can interrupt it before it consolidates. The first mistake that makes you an easy target is reacting immediately. When someone makes a provocative comment and you respond instantly, you're not defending your position. You're giving up control of the pace. The toxic person learns something essential. They can provoke a response whenever they want. This quick reaction doesn't come from weakness, but from habit. The brain tries to resolve discomfort as quickly as possible. Responding seems to relieve tension, but it actually reinforces the pattern. Each immediate reaction acts as a reward. It confirms that the stimulus has had an effect, and what is reinforced is repeated. Toxic people thrive on that confirmation. They don't need to win an argument. They need to feel influence. When you react quickly, you show that their words have direct access to your emotional state. From that moment on, they no longer interact with you as an equal, but as a predictable system. Here's a simple but powerful rule. Delaying your response breaks the circuit. Not responding instantly creates an uncomfortable void for the provoker. That brief silence deactivates the reward and forces the other person to face uncertainty. They don't know if they've gone too far, if they've failed, or if they've achieved nothing. Delaying isn't staying silent forever. It's gaining time. It's allowing the initial emotion to subside enough for you to choose a response if you decide to give one. Clarity emerges in that space, and clarity completely changes the dynamic. When you don't react to the first impulse, the implicit message is clear. Not just anyone decides when you move. This signal is often enough for many toxic people to lose interest. They look for easy reactions, not silent resistance. The mistake isn't in feeling the provocation, but in turning it into immediate action. Whoever learns to curb that reflex stops being an attractive target. And that change doesn't require confrontation, just control of your time. The second mistake that keeps you trapped in toxic dynamics is the constant need to explain yourself. When someone questions your decisions and you feel the urge to justify yourself, you think you're clarifying the situation. In reality, you're accepting a judgment that was never yours to bear. Over-explaining communicates insecurity, even if you don't intend to. It conveys that you need approval to validate your choices. For a toxic person, that's a clear signal. They can keep pushing. Every explanation opens a new door to question, reinterpret, or invalidate what you say. This pattern is often accompanied by an almost guilty tone, even when you've done nothing wrong. Long sentences, unnecessary details, attempts to convince. All of this shifts the conversation from facts to self-defense. And when you defend yourself without having been formally accused, you put the other person in a position of authority that doesn't belong to them. People who rarely fall for this game use brief, firm responses, not because they're arrogant, but because they understand that not everything requires explanation. Sometimes a simple phrase is enough, "Because I decided so." That response isn't hostile or closed off. It's autonomous. It sets a boundary without entering into conflict. The addiction to explaining yourself also drains your energy. Every justification prolongs the interaction and keeps the toxic dynamic alive. The more you talk, the more material you offer to be manipulated. Selective silence, on the other hand, cuts off the supply. When you stop explaining every decision, something changes immediately. The other person loses ground. They can no longer debate your motives or rewrite your narrative. They are forced to accept that they don't have unlimited access to your reasons. Breaking this habit doesn't mean becoming inaccessible. It means choosing when an explanation is helpful and when it only feeds a control game. By doing so, you regain your position and drastically reduce the interest of those who seek to dominate through emotional exhaustion. The third mistake that solidifies a toxic relationship is failing to establish consequences. Many people believe that ignoring harmful behavior is a form of maturity. In reality, when there are no consequences, the message is different. Everything is allowed. And what is allowed is repeated. Toxic people learn through patterns, not speeches. You can explain 1,000 times how you feel, but if everything continues as before after an act of disrespect, the lesson is clear. There's no cost. There's no real limit. The relationship remains intact, access remains, and the dynamic is reinforced. Consequences don't need to be dramatic or confrontational. It's not about punishing, but about adjusting access, reducing availability, shortening responses, creating distance. These actions communicate something very specific. Your behavior has effects, and that message is much more powerful than any argument. One of the most common mistakes is believing that setting consequences makes you cold or cruel. But the absence of consequences isn't kindness, it's self-abandonment. When you repeatedly tolerate what wears you down, you train the other person to cross increasingly broad limits. People who rarely attract toxic dynamics understand this intuitively. They don't constantly announce limits, they apply them. If someone repeats disrespectful behavior, their access diminishes. Without lengthy explanations, without endless debates, the change is behavioral, not verbal. This strategic withdrawal is often unsettling for those seeking control. They expect a confrontation, not a silent loss of influence. By not getting a reaction or direct resistance, interest wanes. The relationship stops offering emotional reward. Establishing consequences doesn't break healthy relationships, it strengthens them. Those who respect your limits adapt. Those who don't, move away. In both cases, the result protects you. As long as there are no consequences, the pattern continues. When they appear, the dynamic changes, and that change, though subtle, is the beginning of the end for many toxic relationships. The fourth mistake that keeps you trapped in toxic relationships is the constant need to please. The addiction to approval doesn't always manifest as obvious insecurity. It often appears disguised as good manners, empathy, or a desire to avoid conflict. But deep down, it communicates something dangerous: the fear of being rejected. Toxic people detect this fear easily, not because they deeply analyze your personality, but because they observe your reactions. If you change your mind to avoid inconveniencing them, if you give in to maintain harmony, or if you apologize for setting a boundary, the message is clear. Your priority isn't respect, it's being accepted. This pattern creates an unequal relationship. When your behavior is guided by the fear of being disliked, the other person gains a silent advantage. They know they can pressure you, criticize you, or emotionally manipulate you without losing you. And that certainty reinforces their behavior. Constantly seeking approval also disconnects you from your own judgment. You start measuring your decisions by others' reactions, not by what you consider right. Over time, this dynamic erodes self-esteem and increases emotional dependence. The more you need to please, the more vulnerable you become. People who are rarely manipulated understand an uncomfortable truth. It's not possible to be respected and liked by everyone at the same time. Choosing respect means accepting that some people will be uncomfortable. And that discomfort isn't your responsibility. When you stop chasing approval, something reorganizes. Your boundaries become clearer, your responses firmer, and your presence more stable. You don't need to convince or justify. You act from coherence, not from fear. This change often makes those who benefited from your need to please uncomfortable. Some will react with pressure or guilt, others will simply lose interest. In both cases, the result is the same. You regain your emotional autonomy. Breaking the addiction to approval doesn't make you cold. It makes you free. And that freedom drastically reduces the power that toxic people can exert over you. The fifth mistake, and perhaps the deepest, is the fear of being alone. Many toxic relationships are not sustained by affection, affinity, or respect, but by a silent need, not to be without company. This fear creates an invisible dependence that toxic people perceive immediately. When you fear loneliness, you tolerate more than you should. You justify behaviors that harm you, minimize disrespect, and accept dynamics you wouldn't choose in another context. Not because you don't see them, but because the cost of losing the relationship seems greater than the cost of staying in it. Toxic people use this fear as an anchor. They know that as long as you need the relationship to feel complete, they will have room to pressure, manipulate, or demand. They don't need direct threats. Just withdrawing attention, creating distance, or hinting at abandonment is enough to activate your anxiety. The problem isn't desiring connection. The problem is needing it to feel personal worth. When your well-being depends on the other's presence, balance disappears. The relationship stops being an exchange and becomes a constant negotiation, where you always give more. Those who rarely stay in toxic relationships have made peace with loneliness. Not because they always prefer it, but because they don't fear it. They know how to be with themselves without seeking immediate distraction. That inner calm completely changes the dynamic. They no longer cling, they choose. When you feel comfortable being alone, something reverses. The other person loses their greatest tool of control. They can no longer use abandonment as an implicit threat. The relationship becomes optional, not necessary. And what's optional is negotiated from equality. Accepting the possibility of being alone doesn't isolate you. It strengthens you. It filters relationships, reduces dependencies, and attracts healthier bonds. People who were only there for emotional convenience move away. Those who respect your autonomy stay. The fear of loneliness keeps the toxic pattern alive. Peace with loneliness deactivates it. Toxic people don't disappear because you confront them, or because you try to change them, or because you explain how they make you feel. They disappear when they stop getting what they're looking for. And what they're looking for isn't conflict, but access. Access to your energy, your attention, and your emotional reaction. Throughout this journey, we've seen that you don't need to transform your entire personality to stop being a target. It's enough to interrupt just one of the mistakes that keeps the dynamic alive. Delaying a reaction, stopping explanations, applying consequences, giving up constant approval, or accepting the possibility of being alone. Any of these changes alters the balance. When you stop reacting as expected, the pattern breaks. The toxic person no longer finds a reward. They don't get confirmation, don't feel control, and don't perceive influence. Without drama, without arguments, and without grand declarations, they lose interest. And when they lose interest, they leave. This process isn't immediate or comfortable. At first, it can generate guilt, doubt, or fear. But these feelings are signs of adjustment, not error. They indicate that you are leaving a role that no longer benefits you. With time, clarity replaces anxiety, and calm substitutes exhaustion. Stopping being a target doesn't mean becoming cold, distant, or distrustful. It means becoming conscious, choosing with whom you share your energy and under what conditions. It means understanding that your well-being is not negotiable and that respect is not begged for. Healthy relationships don't need constant tests or silent sacrifices. They flow from balance. When you adopt this approach, something changes naturally. Toxic people move away, and authentic relationships find space to appear. The final question isn't why you attracted toxic people. The question is more powerful. What are you willing to change to stop needing them in your life? Right there, exactly there, your true emotional freedom begins.